Yes, Bonsai Trees, if you were watching this review, I have to review every single release you put out until you die of old age. It's just the way it is. Hey guys, it's Joe Proulx, and it's time for a new review of the new Bonsai Trees record, Learn to Grow. Bonsai Trees are a Connecticut-based rock band. They have gone through a few different lineup changes. I think at this point they are a quartet, and this is I believe their third full-length album. Their last one came out in 2017. It was titled Not Better. I enjoyed it highly. I give it an honorable mention in my 2017 best of list, and I thought it was a really enjoyable second album from these guys, and I think it's a step up actually from Minimalist, which I still find to be their enjoyable debut album. That if you haven't listened to these guys before, I recommend going and checking out either one of those first two full-length albums. It'll help you get well acquainted with this band's sound. And really the only misstep in their discography thus far, I think, has been the Live Free and Die EP, which I feel like is still kind of just a weird moment in their discography for me, where it doesn't feel as bright and as catchy and as memorable as all of their other releases. Though again, I think it still has some decent moments on it. That's the only one that I'm just not that much of a fan of. However, I really wasn't anticipating this new full-length album as much as I was Not Bitter, mostly because the two lead singles that I heard from this thing, the tracks Vice Grips and Dark Parking Lot, they just kind of seemed like very average songs for these guys. Like nothing much was really grabbing me at first when I listened to these singles. I wasn't really super duper hard looking forward to this record based off of those two singles, unfortunately. However, I will say that they do sound better in the context of the record, and I will say that this is far from a misstep here on Learn to Grow. Now, I do think that Not Better is a better record compared to this one, though I do say something about this record that I think is showing that the group is still progressing. They're still putting together some pretty cool stuff in their music, and they're still showing some interesting progression, is that this is, I think, easily their most mature record. Lyrically and songwriting-wise, I think this is definitely the most mature I've ever heard Bonsai Trees. Lyrical content is something I really haven't focused on super highly in Bonsai Trees stuff. Most of the time it's kind of just the usual relationships talk from James McPherson, who I do think has a very ear-grabbing and very recognizable voice. I just think that their lyrical content was maybe secondary to the tune of a certain track being good. While the relationship stuff is still basically the focus of most of the tracks on this 10-track, 38-minute record, I do think that there is some noticeable changes to some of the stories being told, the depth of the stories being told, and also just topics in general. And I think the record gets off to a great start with the first two tracks. I mean, the opener, Don't, I think is a great starter, with the tune and the whole chord progression of this track being pretty upbeat and uplifting, though the lyrics being quite bitter. Which is kind of the perfect scenario for a Bonsai Trees song. I mean, it's a great opener to this thing. And I think the following track, the lead single from this thing, Vice Grips, has just grown on me immensely since I first heard it as a single. I mean, I think that hook is just unbelievable in terms of catchiness. Like, it just sticks in my head. Like, I'm singing along every single time it comes on when I listen to this album. However, I still am kind of on the fence with the following track and the other single from this thing, Dark Parking Lot. While I do get what the band is trying to go for here, it's just not a sound that I find that appealing or that interesting. It is just a little clumsily written in terms of its tune. I do think that the tune here doesn't shine through as well and doesn't just capture my mind's attention as much as other ones on here or other Bonsai Tree songs. However, I do think the band makes their first misstep on the track We Talked, and honestly, it's just not that the band is not trying to be ambitious on this thing. I mean, it's the longest track on the record. I think it might be the longest Bonsai Tree track ever at 5.5 minutes. I'm not at all doubting that the band put a lot into this song. I mean, the extra piano on this thing and the structure of the song, how expansive it is for them. I think it is a definite, again, step up in maturity from songwriting perspective, but the big issue I have with this track is an issue that I have with most of the rest of the record, and that's the production sound on this thing, as well as just the tune not being that memorable. I do think that the mix on this thing feels a little flat on a song that's supposed to be this long and climactic and kind of epic. I just wish that the mix was a little bit more, had a little bit more grit, as when the final climax of the song comes in with the piano kind of layering over top of these screaming rock and roll guitars, it doesn't sound that beautiful or just kind of like realistic to me from a mixing perspective. It just kind of sounds weird to me. And it just ended up being one of my least favorite on the record, unfortunately. Though I have seen other people say that it's one of the best on the record. It doesn't work for me. However, I think the following track after this one, Shotgun, which is another really ambitious track, another 5.5-minute track for these guys, is I think one of their best songs they've ever written, in terms of the fact that it's about shootings, the recent amount of shootings that have been happening all over the world, and especially in America, in the United States. And I feel like this is the band's way of commenting on it in a way, and I think it's actually really, really well executed. I love the stop-start kind of riff that kind of sounds like literally a shotgun blast that they kind of come back to in the song a bunch of times. I think it's a really effective way of just kind of drawing you into the track. The tune on here is solid. I love the really kind of darker tone of this track as well, with the groove that they fall into in the verses. I also love that way that they kind of slow down on the bridge and kind of build it back up again. It was a really, really, really well executed kind of source of tension in the track that I feel like it, again, shows the maturity of the songwriting on this record. Not on every track does it necessarily come through, but I think on this track it definitely shone through brightly. I mean, this is a great track. However, we dip back down into a track that I don't dig at all on the 6th track, The Curtain, which I think is actually my least favorite track on the record. It's a piano tune with James singing by himself, just with him and the piano, and I have nothing against that. I like usually tracks when he does a little bit more, when Bonsai Trees does a little bit more of a low-key kind of an acoustic cut. I think the one on the last record, Everything You Wanted, was a great track. I love the track Sad off of their debut LP. However, this one I think is definitely the worst, and I don't think that the tune itself is terrible. I just think that James's performance vocally seems a little weird for the emotional tone of this song. Like, just the way that he's trying to hit these notes, and instead of hitting the note on some of these choruses, he's just going, "Ow!" He's just like, he's giving it his all. I'm not saying he's not trying, but it's just kind of sounds a little off, and it just rubbed me the wrong way for some reason. I just think this track overall is just not as strong a tune as other ones, and also just, again, that performance just kind of throws me off a little bit, just being honest. However, the following track, Away From Me, I think is a great step up. Again, kind of the band recovering from another kind of track that I don't dig at all, and dropping a really good track here where, again, for the most of the track, it's actually, again, very low key. However, I love the way that James paints a picture with his lyric on this track. I think it's one of his best lyrical tracks in his discography, and it's just great how he builds the tension, even though the track overall, for the most part, is pretty low-key until the band busts in the final leg of the track. I think it's a great song. Really kind of picks up the pace of the record when it really needed it. The following track, Garbage, is another one of my huge favorites on this thing. I mean, one of the probably the hardest hitting track on the entire record. Awesome tune, awesome riffs, great performance, just an amazing energy from this track that I just can't deny. Like, this track has been on repeat for the last little while for me. Like, it's a great track. Really a track that needed to be on the back end of this record, just to, again, just kind of keep the record going strong. And the following track after that, I Love an Artist, I think is one of the most interesting lyrical tracks on this record as well, where you get James talking about, I guess, the trouble and the things that might happen if one falls in love with an artist. And I think it's actually really well executed. It didn't feel forced or anything. I do like the change of tone, instrumentally speaking, with a bit more of a cuter vibe coming off of the drum groove and the guitars on this track. It felt really natural. It didn't feel forced, and it was a really nice kind of humorous little song to throw into the back end of the record. I think it actually creates a nice little stretch from Away From Me to Garbage to I Love an Artist. I think those are three really, really good tracks. However, I do think that the closing track on here, Rose, is a bit of a meh closer for this record. I don't think that it is strong as other closing tracks that Bonsai Trees have come out with, especially Come Back Crawling, which I think is their best closer they've ever come up with. This one just kind of feels like a ho-hum song they could have thrown in the middle of the record and nobody would have said anything. And I just honestly think they could have written a better closing track, or they could have maybe ordered this record a little bit better so that maybe there was a better, more fitting closing track at this spot. And overall, I would say that this record is not perfect at all. I think it has some issues in its production at points. I do think that occasionally the tune or the performances or just the choices made on this record for tunes, for performances, for production, it kind of holds this record back a little bit. And I think that overall, just it's a little bit more inconsistent than Not Bitter. And I do think that because of that reason, Not Bitter is a better record. However, I will not say that this record is bad at all. I will not say that it is not incredibly enjoyable. And I am not at all disappointed in these guys. I think this is still a really solid album. I think I'm looking forward to whatever they come through with next, and I'm going to be looking out for whatever they do next, because again, this is another quality indie rock, pop rock, and post-punky little album that has a bit more of a singer-songwriter flair on this one, but I think it goes over really well. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm feeling a 7.5 on this thing. Thought it was really enjoyable. Don't think it's amazing. I don't love it, but I do think it is a really enjoyable LP, and I think if you're a fan of Bonsai Trees, you're probably gonna love the crap out of this thing. And I guess if you guys are watching, another good record, guys. Really proud of what you've done here. I think you should be proud. I think a lot of people have said that this is like a step up from Not Bitter, and I think if people think that on the whole, you shouldn't be mad at all. Like I think this is a really enjoyable record. I don't think that it's your best work yet, but I'm loving the maturity. I'm loving the risks you're taking. I like that you're trying to move your sound forward, and I think that you should continue to do that. And I think that you might have an amazing record in your future. But right now, I'm gonna say that this is an interesting step for you guys to take, and I'm looking forward to what you guys do next. But for now, liking this record a lot, so keep doing what you're doing. Other than that, that's all I got to say to you guys. If you want to go check out some of my music and stuff like that, all the links are in the description, also to my social media stuff. Go check that out. I've put out a new single recently called Gold that you guys can go check it out if you want. I've also been doing some other music stuff recently. Go check out my Instagram page if you want to learn about that stuff, or my Facebook page. I've been doing some work with a couple different artists recently, so if you want to hear some of my work on those guys' albums, you should go check that out. But other than that, I don't got anything to say. My name is Joe Proulx. This is Joe Proulx Music Reviews, and I'm out.